Namaskar. This is Akhilesh Bhargava. Welcome to Tit-Bits on Business and Finance with me. The segment of the economy that suffers the most with every COVID resurge is the preeminent informal MSME sector, which is the biggest generator of jobs and livelihood in the country and which contributes to over 50% of India's GDP. The sector was already weak and emaciated because of several years of the economic slowdown that preceded the first COVID wave in March-April 2020. India's GDP growth rate then had fallen to a dismal 3% only in March 2020. The sector thus has been rife with closures and downsizing, but many yet managed to just about survive the COVID waves 1 and 2. And that was because of the 6-month moratorium, the restructuring of loans by banks, and the additional funding under the ECLGS loan scheme provided to eligible units under the cover of a government guarantee. The tweaking of the NPA recognition norms for the MSME borrowers also helped to postpone the emerging NPAs in this sector, giving temporary relief to the borrowers. The ECLGS loans, which is the loans under the Emergency Loan Guarantee Scheme, did not really augment or increase the working and productive capital of the desperate borrowers who used the additional loans primarily to repay debt in order to avoid bankruptcy and forced closures. Moreover, all that these measures did was to postpone the repayment of debt, which was bound to come back and haunt the sector after this forbearance period was over, as we will now see after the third COVID wave ends. The fact is that the rescheduling of any debt repayment merely postpones the inevitable if no further support is given in order to bolster the business finances of the borrower concerned. The government has given no financial grant or fiscal support in order to augment and increase the productive and working capital resources of the borrowers to be able to resume their manufacturing, production, business or trading activity and to strengthen their ability to repay all these loans which have been restructured. Apart from these measures, the MSMEs also survived on their past savings, as is evident from the massive amount of gold loans which have been disbursed in the last 2 years. The fact is that the barrel is now empty and MSMEs have no further substratum or support left in order to be able to survive on their own. And that is the reality that is hitting India. If further financial support is not forthcoming, then NPAs and business closures and bankruptcies will rise in the MSME sector, only adding to the overall misery in the Indian economy. It is because of this that many are worried for the MSME sector today. And who all are they? With critical state elections on the cards and the budget round the corner, the BJP itself took up this issue of much needed support for the MSMEs in its pre-budget memorandum to the finance minister. In its pre-budget presentation to the FM, the party flagged concerns about the informal sector. It said that the BJP has concerns about the informal sector and the MSMEs hit hard by the steep fall in credit growth and calls for articulation of a clear fiscal consolidation path in order to boost investor confidence and to revive consumption. It further says that the informal sector is in desperate need of support and that the steep fall in credit growth for the informal sector has to be addressed. The BJP further told the finance minister that a number of issues need to be done, and for that in its presentation, it raised 7 major points for the FM to consider. The first point it said is that there has been deceleration in the informal sector and there is lack of availability of credit to it. The second point it said was that measures are needed in order to spur consumption so that demand goes up and growth goes up. It then said that a steep fiscal consolidation path must be avoided. That is, the government must not be too mindful of a burgeoning fiscal deficit and it must be willing to spend in order to kickstart growth in the economy. It further says that focus on bringing down the cost of raw materials and base metals so that the profitability of the MSME units goes up. It then says that there must be further rationalization of the inverted duty structure which is hitting these units. According to it, assistance must be provided to stressed sectors like travel, tourism, and hospitality. And finally, the memorandum from the BJP to the FM says that there is need to focus on reviving consumption and demand in the economy. The BJP's generic pre-budget demands for the sector state the obvious according to us, and they refrain from stating the real issues that plague the sector. They also dare not mention the numerous policy blunders like demonetization, a hurried and complicated GST, and the sudden lockdown last year, and of course, the continued reluctance of banks to lend to MSMEs, which over the years had brought the MSME sector down to its knees today. This was the BJP's concern for MSMEs. Yet another pre-budget memorandum that demands a relief package for the MSMEs is from the Federation of Indian MSMEs. It says that with a large number of MSMEs continuing to feel the pain due to the COVID pandemic, there is need for another relief package for the sector. It requests for support in line with the ECLGS scheme, which entails 100% credit guarantee by the NCGTC, which is the National Credit Guarantee Trusteeship Company of the Government of India, on loans extended to the MSMEs by banks and NBFCs. In other words, it wants a repeat of the ECLGS scheme. It further says that since MSMEs are unable to furnish additional security to be able to restructure the loans, the government must provide guarantee through the NCGTC so that loans can be restructured and they are given some relief. It finally says that the IBC must be amended so that MSMEs get better recoveries and are not made to stand last in the queue where they get a pittance and their dues are mostly written off. Apart from these, the other one that calls for support to the MSME sector is the Financial Express, which says that we need to support the SME sector in order to fight inequality in the country. The Financial Express says that growth was already going down and had fallen to 3% in March 2020. Growth in the country, according to it, has been unequal and skewed towards big companies and well-off households. It then quotes Kaushik Basu, the former Chief Economic Advisor of India, to say that the country's policies over the last few years have largely focused on large businesses, citing the steep cut in corporate tax to 15%, which mainly benefits the big sector. It has given better profitability to the corporates. For example, it mentions that in financial year 2021, the profits of 1,995 big corporates went up by 16%, and that too in a year when the economy contracted. 120 million jobs were lost, of which 92 million jobs were in the informal sector, but the big ones still did good. It then says that larger players are further taking away the market share from smaller players in the unorganized sector. The Financial Express then speaks of an Oxfam study citing Forbes, which says that in financial year 2021, 84% of households in India suffered a fall in their income, such that a mere 6% of national income today accrues to the bottom 50% of Indian households. The FE then pertinently says that ignoring the informal sector could hurt wages and macro stability also. It employs 80% of India's labor force and produces over 50% of India's GDP and thus needs attention. We thus need schemes to help small businesses in the informal segment, it says, and it also calls for another round of ECLGS loans. The fact that the MSME sector is in urgent need of relief cannot be denied. But then, short-term measures like restructuring, moratorium and ECLGS are mere temporary band-aids that do not improve the fundamentals and the long-term profitability and competitiveness of the sector on which its own survival depends. Even fiscal support or grants to it would provide temporary relief only unless the overall environment for the MSME sector is improved, and for which, to us, the ball lies mainly in the government's court. The ease of doing business and the ease of earning needs to be improved for the MSME sector, and that includes a number of measures, some of which are worth pointing out. The first thing where they suffer has to do with corruption and red tapeism. And thus, we need to mitigate corruption and red tapeism, which this sector faces all the time. The second issue is eliminate the scourge of unwarranted notices from departments like GST, Income Tax Department, etc., which inflict huge contingent liabilities on them and consume their cash flows and profits. The incidence of frivolous notices from these departments has shot up in tandem with the large volumes of data which the government collects on everything that you do. The third issue is that compliance today is multiple, burdensome, unwanted and expensive, often entailing huge system-driven penalties with no recourse, even for the smallest of unintentional defaults by a small unit. That needs to stop, that needs to be diluted and reduced. Further, we need to prevent the delays in giving refunds and incentives under schemes like the SIES, MIEs, etc., because of which this sector suffers. We need to prevent harassment of small entrepreneurs by the local goons, often patronized by the ruling party politicians themselves. We also need to have special codes for the MSME units where judicial process is time-bound and it is not expensive, because that is where again they suffer immensely. Banks must be told to lend speedily to the MSME units, which today they do not do so. And finally, to us, MSMEs also deserve concessional tax rates and incentives. We think these are the points that need to be considered more than anything else. It is such measures that are needed to strengthen MSMEs and support their survival. Few entrepreneurs in India expect financial support from the government, but all that they expect is a better business environment, which is the responsibility of the government to provide. That to us is the budget wish list for the MSME sector, and that is what we would ask the FM to look into. This is Akhilesh Bhargava signing off till we meet again. Namaskar.